Soon enough, Darcy's passion soared for this beautiful woman whose very essence spoke to him in a language he had never before heard. He adored her. Oh, to spend the rest of his life communicating only with her in such a fashion. This feels so perfect, so natural, so right. Let us fall in love, he wanted to say. How could he when they really did not know each other? Whether he was bewitched or suffering the most vivid dream in his lifetime, he needed to be certain beyond a shadow of doubt of what they were sharing. "Tell me this is not a dream," he whispered, kissing her on her forehead.
"I assure you it is not."
"You likely have surmised that I am Fitzwilliam Darcy, Bingley's friend. When next we meet, you must find a way to call me William. Then, and only then, I shall know. Tonight was not merely a dream, but rather the best night of my life."
"The best night, sir?" Elizabeth asked.
Darcy assured her that indeed it was. "The two of us are so very much alike," he later said. "We both value family above all else, and as a consequence, we likely would do anything for them. As it pertains to your current circumstances, no one who truly knows you would judge you harshly for marrying a man whom you do not love for the sake of your family. I say this not to advise you on how you ought to act in light of your recent discovery. I only mean to say that honourable men and women of all stations in life marry out of obligation every day."
"Honourable, you say? So you think you know me, Mr. Darcy?"
"Yes, I think I know you very well, Mrs. Tillman."
"Pray, sir, in light of all that has unfolded between us, I would have you call me anything but that."
"What precisely shall I call you?"
"What else would you like to call me?" she asked, her spirits rising to playfulness. How good it felt to be able to show this side of her, if only for one night.
"I think I would like to call you my love," he replied.
His eyes said even more. She could feel her heartbeat speeding its pace. "My love? Sir, I must object to such an appellation. You cannot possibly love me. Our acquaintance is far too short a duration to warrant the sentiment."
"On the contrary, my love, I feel as though I have known you all my life. I have loved you from the moment I first laid eyes on you. Surely you believe in destiny?"
She shook her head. "I cannot say that I do."
"Destiny is when two people who are meant to be together find their way to each other against all odds."
"You and I made love tonight, sir, time and time again, but I fear that is a far cry from our having found our way to each other."
"Oh, Elizabeth, my love, the path is clear, and if you will but trust me, I will show you the way." The two lovers awakened at early dawn and prepared, albeit reluctantly, to part each other's company. "I suppose I ought to leave this room as well. Your sister will expect to find you here this morning, will she not?"
"No, I decided this room was more suitable, which is why the servant believed it was unoccupied. I usually occupy an apartment on the same corridor as the mistress's apartment when I spend the night here. Only last night I dared not chance my sister discovering me in such a wretched state, especially in the wake of her happy news."
"There, you see, it was destiny that drew you to this particular room last night," Darcy said.
She smiled in acknowledgement of the veracity of his declaration. "No doubt," she silently considered. "You must stay here, sir. The servant will surely inform Charles that he escorted you to this apartment. As for my own situation, there is no cause for concern. You see, I am very fond of early walks. No one will be surprised that I am up and about at this hour as opposed to being in my usual apartment."
Guiding her around to face him, he lifted her chin and kissed her lips. At length he said, "Until we meet again, properly." After last night with Mr. Darcy.
Chapter 1. Elizabeth fought to keep her hands from trembling. Finally, the formidable formal introductions were over, and one of her greatest challenges was just beginning. She had to act as if she had never laid eyes on the gentleman who had held her so tenderly throughout the previous night, Mr. Fitzwilliam Darcy. He was the man who had made her feel like a woman for the first time in her life, despite her being a widow, and despite her being on the heels of marrying another man. Mr. Darcy stood just over 6 feet tall. He was solidly built and wore an impeccably tailored suit. The way his eyes pored all over her and the gentle touch of his hands flooded Elizabeth's senses with memories of being with him. Last night was not a dream, the consequence of an excitable imagination. Instead, he is before me, the most beautiful man my eyes might ever wish to behold. Everyone else in the room fell away. It was only Mr. Darcy and Elizabeth in that moment together. The others in the breakfast room might just as well have been part of the décor, along with the ornate walls and curtains tied back with golden tassels, her brother-in-law, Charles Bingley, and his sister Caroline, and several uniformed footmen attending their posts. Instead, Elizabeth only saw Mr. Darcy standing before her, someone who possessed the power to throw all her carefully laid out plans for her future into utter and complete chaos.
For Mr. Darcy's part, Elizabeth's arrival proved a balm to all the anticipation he had suffered, hoping and waiting for her to appear in the room while doing his best to play the part of an attentive guest, one who listened and responded to his friend Charles Bingley at the right time, while deflecting his friend's sister Miss Bingley's persistent but unfruitful attempts to engage him in conversation. "She called me William," Darcy recalled thinking when Elizabeth approached him a few moments before. Never had the sound of a single word filled him with so much joy, so much pleasure, and most of all, so much hope, that the night they had shared was but the promise of so many more such nights to come. Doing everything in his power not to belie the notion of this being their first introduction, Darcy fought back the happiness that threatened to overtake his countenance. His busy mind, however, would not be so easily subdued. He was nervous, doing his best not to show it. He managed to keep a serious expression on his face. He had to remind himself that she was not his. Not yet. He had to remind himself that to everyone else in the room, he and Elizabeth were mere strangers who had never laid eyes on each other prior to that occasion. Confused by this battle between his emotions and his brain, Darcy forced himself to breathe. Elizabeth walked to the buffet, and he watched her every movement, unable to tear his eyes away from her. Once she had chosen everything she wanted, she turned and glanced around the table. Her dark, bewitching eyes landed on him, and she smiled softly. He smiled back at her. She began to walk toward him. His heart raced. Elizabeth's footsteps were slow and measured, but they eventually led her to him. He wondered how it was possible that he was so nervous, but he was sure it had something to do with this being the first time they were seeing each other since they had spent the best part of the night making love. Also, it was the first time they would be engaging each other in a crowded setting. Would it be obvious what had happened between them? Would it be evident that he had been with her in the way that a man was supposed to be with a woman? Darcy longed to be anywhere other than the breakfast room, as long as it was just the two of them. He wanted to embrace her and kiss her. He wanted to do even more than that. Elizabeth stood mere inches away from him. Darcy hoped his heartbeat was not so loud as he suspected. He arose from his seat, careful not to betray his calm composure, or rather lack thereof.
"Do you have any objections to my sitting beside you, Mr. Darcy?" she asked, placing her plate on the table.
Her voice was music to Darcy's ears. "It is my pleasure, I assure you," he began softly. "Your doing so must surely hasten my getting better acquainted with you." Elizabeth stumbled. Darcy caught her. He brought her against him and held her. Darcy was stunned by the feelings that came over him. He was fascinated by the glistening curve of her throat and by the rise and fall of her breast as she breathed. He heard himself make a soft noise, something between a laugh and a sigh. "Are you injured? Did you trip over your own feet?"
"Or rather something to that effect," Elizabeth replied.
Darcy stared hard at Elizabeth's lips. He wanted to hold her in his arms and kiss her until they were both breathless. Indeed, he wanted nothing more than to hold her and never let her go.
"There is no need for concern," Elizabeth continued, freeing herself from his hold on her. "I suppose I am a bit clumsy this morning. I have not yet had my morning tea," she said as she sat down.
"Your morning tea?" Darcy responded questioningly. He sat down in his chair.
"Indeed, I am never quite myself until I have had my morning tea. It makes me—"
Darcy held his breath as she paused. Elizabeth was teasing him. A loosened strand of her dark hair fell across her face. He ached to reach out and tuck it behind her ear, He fought the urge. Doing so would have been the most natural thing in the world to him hours earlier. Recalling how he had fastened her gown at the break of dawn, he almost groaned with the need to touch her. "What does it make you?" he asked. Heavens, he wanted to see her smile at him again. He had seen her tears. He had held her in his arms the night before and listened as she wept. Now, he simply wanted to hear her laugh.
"Well, sir, it makes me happy," she said. "I am always happiest when I have had my morning tea, and now that you know one of my secrets, you must tell me one of yours."
Darcy half smiled. "I am sure I have no such secrets to share, at least not in present company." She was sitting so close. She smelled like roses and sunlight and everything good in the world, and he wanted her so much.
"Spoken as only a gentleman would," Elizabeth said.
But she was still smiling and still close enough that he could have kissed her if their circumstances had allowed.
"You are a gentleman, are you not? Or have I misjudged your character?"
"Do you fancy yourself a good judge of character?" Darcy asked.
"I certainly like to think I am."
"I beg your pardon, but for the sake of argument, what if I am not a gentleman?" Elizabeth laughed again.
"Why, of course you are. How could you not be a gentleman? In my limited experience, I dare say you appear to be everything a gentleman ought to be."
His gaze lingered on her, allowing the time to let his eyes roam over her face, admiring the shape of her lips, her cheeks, and the curve of her neck. Inwardly he sighed. He was happy that Elizabeth felt comfortable enough to sit beside him and engage in such teasing banter. Still, he did not think it was wise for her to be so close to him. Realizing that he was staring at her, he quickly reached for the pot of steaming hot coffee and poured himself a cup, waving away the servant's offer of assistance. He became somewhat self-conscious. He knew very well that he was feeling this way because her eyes, her lips, and her skin held him captive in a way that he had never experienced with any other woman. "I trust you had a pleasant walk this morning," he said, seizing the initiative.
"Did I mention having walked this morning?"
"You did not have to. Your eyes gave you away."
"My eyes?"
"Indeed, your eyes, for what other explanation is there for their brightness at such an hour as this, if not the exertion of such an exercise?"
"How astute of you to notice."
"I hope you will afford me many such opportunities for such observations." If he had hoped for a positive response, he was not disappointed. Elizabeth's smile faltered for a moment before returning brighter than ever. She nodded.
"Yes, I shall."
Darcy smiled, and then he asked, "Will you do me another favour?"
"Anything," she said, blushing all the while.
The blush caused his heart to flutter wildly in his chest, and he was a bit breathless as he continued. "Then I would like to invite you to take a walk with me this afternoon."
"I would like that very much," she whispered.
"Do you have any fixed plans?" he asked. "If not, shall we say 3:00? Elizabeth nodded her head. "I look forward to it," he said.
"As do I."
Darcy was not sure how much longer he could last. His attraction to her was so strong, so intoxicating. Adoration and longing roared through him like a tidal wave. He wondered if she realized what he was feeling. He wondered if she could read his mind. Could Elizabeth tell that he was attracted to her in the way a man was supposed to be attracted to a woman? He wondered if she knew he wanted nothing more than to be with her, alone, for the rest of the day, and possibly for the rest of his life. Trying his best to remain calm and collected, he took a sip of his coffee and then a bite of fruit.
"Mr. Darcy seems quite taken with our Mrs. Tillman. Are you not, Mr. Darcy?" Miss Bingley opined, with particular emphasis on the title in Elizabeth's surname.
"I am fascinated," he remarked, leaving the young lady looking stupid.
The aggrieved young lady's ensuing words, spoken under her breath, were inaudible to Elizabeth's ears. However, Elizabeth had not been entirely oblivious to the young lady sitting at the table throughout breakfast. She watched out of the corner of her eye as a scowl formed on Miss Bingley's face. Obviously, the young woman was not happy about what she saw happening mere feet away. Elizabeth was not sure what to make of her peevish expression. Did she view Mr. Darcy as her own rightful property? Was she annoyed that he was shirking her attention and flirtations and engaging in conversation with the most unlikely prospect, a young woman he had just met and whose family had no wealth or influence to offer? Despite her attempts to appear reconciled, Caroline was outraged that her brother had married Jane Bennet. Elizabeth knew Caroline felt no fondness for anyone else in the Bennet family, but most of all she despised Elizabeth. Miss Bingley was biting her bottom lip, sighing loudly and often, and looking to draw attention to herself. She definitely was having an uneasy moment, a very unladylike one at that. The last thing Elizabeth wanted was to give rise to Miss Bingley's jealousy, especially if such concerns genuinely called for such a sentiment. After all, what did she know about the gentleman seated next to her? He had given the slightest hints of an attachment, but heavens forbid said attachment involved Caroline Bingley. What a harrowing thought indeed, one which Elizabeth was not in the mood to entertain. She had promised herself that her night with Mr. Darcy was a one-time occurrence, at best, and certainly not something she was likely to repeat any time soon, at most. Elizabeth had resolved to marry Mr. William Collins, her duplicitous cousin and heir to her late father's estate, to save her family from losing Longbourn. She had no time for distractions. Turning her attention to her brother-in-law, Charles Bingley, Elizabeth asked, "How is my sister this morning?"
"Quite well, Elizabeth. She's looking well and feeling well too. She's happy as can be, as you can very well imagine the reason."
Elizabeth smiled knowingly, for Bingley was no doubt referring to his wife's being with child, the joyful news which Jane had shared with Elizabeth the day before, and unknowingly set the stage for Elizabeth's current predicament. "I am happy to hear that," said Elizabeth. "I look forward to seeing her before returning to Longbourn."
"I know it will delight her to see you," said Charles. "Pray, let me know when you plan to take your leave, and I shall call for a carriage."
"Thank you, Charles. However, that is entirely unnecessary. I much prefer to walk. After last night, I am in desperate want of the exertion." Despite her nocturnal activities, Elizabeth was bursting with energy, or maybe she was so energized because of them. All she knew was she was in no hurry to relinquish her memories from last night to the unpleasant reality of what awaited her at Longbourn, an excitable mother, 3 silly younger sisters, and her ridiculous intended.
"Yes, of course," said Charles, nodding his head.
Elizabeth dabbed her mouth with her napkin, placed it aside, and stood to take her leave. She had taken but a few paces before Mr. Darcy cleared his throat, setting his cup aside.
"Pardon me as well, Charles. I have matters to attend with my man, Waters, which will not wait." "Of course," replied Charles.
Miss Bingley stood just as Mr. Darcy did. She raced to him and tried blocking his path.
"Mr. Darcy," she said, interlacing her arm with his, "it is so long since I last saw you. We have not seen each other in months. I am hoping we might spend the morning getting reacquainted, just the 2 of us."
Elizabeth's gaze widened. She could not believe Miss Bingley's audacity.
"Miss Bingley," said Mr. Darcy, looking at the young lady most peculiarly, as though thoroughly displeased with what she'd said. He snatched his arm away from her touch as if he had felt a sharp sting shoot up it from her hand to his elbow, and wanted to get rid of the sensation as quickly as possible. He turned on his heels and strode out of the room, right past Elizabeth standing near the doorway, staring after him, utterly shocked at the scene that had just played out in front of her eyes.
Miss Bingley called out,
"Oh, Mr. Darcy, I just remembered that I have something of immense importance to discuss with you. Let us take a turn around the garden so we may talk."
Mr. Darcy did not slow his pace. He kept walking.
"Mr. Darcy, wait for me," Miss Bingley called out even louder.
"Caroline, please," came Charles's voice.
"Oh, very well," said Miss Bingley, resigning herself.
Elizabeth could have sworn that there was something akin to pain in the woman's voice. Elizabeth was not sure she liked what she had witnessed. She was certain that what transpired was not at all proper. Would not the right thing for a gentleman to have done be to attend to the lady, however inconvenient it might prove? Not that she wanted to be drawn into whatever theatrical performance was unfolding between Mr. Darcy and the other woman. Even so, being the curious creature she was, Elizabeth could not help but wonder.
Chapter 2. Mr. Darcy kept to his apartment, pacing back and forth. He could not believe the audacity of that woman, the way she behaved in front of Elizabeth, the way she behaved. Period. Caroline Bingley's behaviour was beyond the pale, trying to hinder his departure from the breakfast room in such an egregious manner. The last thing Darcy wanted was for Elizabeth to get the wrong impression of the incident, to think that Caroline was an object of his affection, past or present. He was certain Elizabeth would think the worst if she got the wrong idea. She would think he was unfeeling and callous in his treatment of young ladies. He slumped into a chair and put his hands on his head. What if Elizabeth thinks I am a rake, a seducer of women? As it was, his conscience already weighed on him, and he felt no gentleman at all for having slept with another man's betrothed. But she had been in so much pain over her fate. To be trapped in such an arrangement, despite it being of one's own choosing, was one thing. In fact, it was not an unusual occurrence for people in his sphere to have arranged marriages for purposes having nothing to do with love or affection. To be young and sensuous and destined for a loveless marriage to a man who was impotent and incapable of fulfilling the promises of the union, its most important purpose of siring an heir, was an entirely different matter. A question that loomed heaviest in his mind was whether that one night of passion would be enough for the passionate young woman. The last thing he meant to do was put added pressure on Elizabeth. He would simply be there for her in any way she needed him. If she came to him, he would be there to welcome her with open arms. He would respect whatever boundaries she needed to ensure her own peace of mind if she did not. Darcy sprang from his chair and crossed the floor. After Miss Bingley's ruse, will Elizabeth even trust me enough to want to have anything to do with me, he wondered. This has the makings of a disaster, a total disaster. Darcy's fist struck the polished dark cherry-wooded post of his canopy bed. The pain caused by the blow crept up his arm. It eventually reached his heart, which was beating fiercely, making it difficult for him to achieve any composure. Darcy suspected that he had to make things right. In truth, he did not even have the opportunity to gauge Elizabeth's reaction before storming from the breakfast room. Perhaps Miss Bingley's little performance had escaped Elizabeth's notice altogether. Surely he could hope. Darcy glanced in the direction of the mirror, and his heart skipped a beat when he saw Elizabeth's reflection. She stood by the doorway, her eyes fixed on him, her countenance noticeably altered. "Elizabeth, when did you get here?" Darcy asked, turning to face her. "I did not hear you come in."
"No, I am sure you did not."
Darcy could feel his face growing warm. He was not sure why, but he found her being there both comforting and alarming all at once. She looked lovely, radiant in her morning gown. Without thinking, he took her in his arms and hugged her tightly, almost too tightly.
Elizabeth hugged him back. Elizabeth felt the heat of his body and his grip tighten around her. She could not recall a time when she had felt more comforted. Elizabeth simply wanted to bask in the warmth of his embrace, but at the same time, her own fears were getting the better of her. She did not want to be angry with him. On the contrary, Elizabeth needed to know she could trust him. She did not want her memories of their night together to be tarnished by suspicion and doubt. By the same token, she needed to let him know that his behaviour towards Miss Bingley was disturbing. "Mr. Darcy," she finally spoke, freeing herself from his tight embrace. Elizabeth stepped away from him. "I think you and I need to talk."
"Does it concern what happened earlier in the breakfast room?"
"Sir, not that it is my place to ask."
"Elizabeth, after last night, there is nothing the two of us cannot talk about."
"Then tell me about Caroline Bingley, specifically. What is she to you?"
"Nothing. She's nothing to me, other than my friend's sister."
Priding herself on her keenness, Elizabeth's senses began to stir. Her pulse was racing, her breath short and laboured. Her cheeks were flushed, and it was not due to anger. "I am afraid your response does not adequately address my question, especially having witnessed what unfolded between you."
"Then let me be specific. Despite Miss Bingley's unabashed attention, I have never given her any sign that I feel anything other than friendship for her."
Before Elizabeth could say more, Darcy took her in his arms again.
"Have I adequately addressed your question?" he asked, cupping her chin with his hand and looking into her eyes.
He did not wait for a reply. The moment his lips touched hers, everything disappeared. It was only the two of them, together, in their own little world. Her hand rested on his chest, connecting him to her. Elizabeth was sure he could hear the pounding of her heart, which was beating wildly. "I did not come here for this," she said in between kisses.
"I know," he whispered, "but since you did come, let us enjoy this moment."
"I have obligations I must attend."
"Did you see your sister?"
"I came here from Jane's apartment."
"Then what other obligations are there?"
"I have to return to Longbourn."
"Stay with me," he whispered, raising his lips from hers. Darcy pressed his forehead to Elizabeth's. "What am I doing?" Darcy found himself silently questioning. If the night before had taught him anything, it was that a man should never go so long without being with a woman he was in danger of losing control. As much as he wanted, even thirsted, for a repetition of their night of shared passion, he was not about to become a slave to his carnal desires. "I'm sorry," he said, letting her go and stepping back.
"Please do not be. It was my fault. I should not have come here like this."
"Not entirely. I took advantage of the moment. Please forgive me."
"What is there to forgive?"
Darcy took a deep breath, then let it out slowly. With each moment that passed, he knew his resolve to take things slower would weaken. The thought of tasting her lips again and feeling her body yield against his was achingly tempting. He turned his back to her. "You must never regret coming to me, Elizabeth. I am here for you. Always."
Darcy's voice was distant, his back to her. He appeared vulnerable, almost defenceless. Elizabeth wanted to hold him close, to comfort him. She knew she should leave, but something stronger kept her from doing so. Instead, she walked up behind him, wanting to touch him, daring herself not to touch him. She ached for him. Elizabeth wrapped her arms around Mr. Darcy's waist. He stood there, silent and still, torn. Elizabeth began to explore his body, touching him, lightly at first, then more daringly. She wanted to be close to him, to be his lover, his mistress. Nothing else mattered, not his past, his changeable moods, or anything. She could feel his body trembling.
"Elizabeth," he said, freeing himself from her embrace and turning to face her. "You have to go."
Chapter 3. An uneasy feeling accompanied Elizabeth every step of the way on her return to Longbourn. Deciding how she should behave around Mr. Darcy posed quite a conundrum, especially after what had transpired between them. They had shared a lingering parting kiss. Mr. Darcy had assured her his sending her away was not a repudiation of her on his part. He had held her in his arms the same way. He had kissed her lips the same way. She wanted to attribute her uncertainty to her own imagination, but other concerns were plaguing her. Elizabeth thought she had sorted out how she felt about Mr. Darcy during her early morning walk. As beautiful as their night together had been, it must never happen again. One look at him in the breakfast room melted every bit of her resolve. She had had a taste of what making love to Mr. Darcy was like, and she could not help wishing for more. That said, Elizabeth needed to make certain Mr. Darcy understood that her willingness to engage in such relations was contingent on mutual understanding. Neither ought to expect anything lasting from the other. Elizabeth had charted her path months ago. She had not decided she would marry William Collins, the heir to the only home she had ever known, owing to an entail to the family's male line, lightly. Having discovered Collins's secret did not bode well for her plans to marry him, give birth to a male heir, to break the entail, and then have as little as possible to do with its father. Part of her entertained the idea that she had been mistaken about what she thought she heard. Part of her embraced the idea that her plans for Longbourn still bore a chance of unfolding. Meeting a man like Mr. Darcy was not meant to change anything. Elizabeth placed her hand on her stomach. She knew enough about her own body to doubt her tryst would lead to unintended consequences. What was more, Mr. Darcy had exercised extraordinary measures to that end. Elizabeth would not regret what they had done, nor would she say it would never happen again. What would be the point? Her head was full of the gentleman and how it felt being in his arms. However, she would vow to be extra mindful of the timing of future assignations. The last thing she needed was to jeopardize her desire to keep her standing as the mistress of Longbourn. She owed it to herself, her family, and her beloved father's memory. Longbourn had always been and always would be their home to Elizabeth's way of thinking. Elizabeth climbed the steps to the front door, cracking it, hoping that her family and her intended Mr. Collins were nowhere around to know she had returned. She pushed it open as quietly as she could and slipped inside. As was her habit, she took a moment to look around the foyer, appreciating that all was as it ought to be. The housekeeper, Mrs. Hill, was adept at keeping things in order, allowing Elizabeth to spend copious time with Jane at Netherfield. Elizabeth headed up the stairs to her apartment, the same room she had shared with her sister Jane, despite her elevated standing as mistress of Longbourn by way of her marriage to her father's immediate successor, the late Mr. Tillman. She had not made it very far when she heard her mother calling. In mere moments she would have to face her mother, who would undoubtedly be especially excited once she learned of the arrival of an eligible man in their society. She had 3 younger daughters to get rid of. The business of her mother's life was marrying them off. This thought made her head ache. She paused for a moment and closed her eyes. Opening them, Elizabeth retraced her steps and went into the parlour where her mother, Mrs. Fanny Bennet, attended her sewing.
"My dear, dear girl, you are home," the former matriarch cried, pouring her eyes over her second eldest daughter before returning them to her sewing. "Did you enjoy your time with Jane?"
"Yes, Mamma."
"How is our dear Jane?"
"Jane is very well."
"Yes, I suppose she is. I pray we will receive exciting news in that quarter soon. Your sister is the mistress of Netherfield, but she must not rest on her laurels until she has given Mr. Bingley an heir."
Of course, Mrs. Bennet could have no way of knowing that her eldest was already with child. Jane had told no one other than Charles and Elizabeth. Elizabeth did not mean to break her sister's confidence. Mrs. Bennet tore her eyes from her task and peered at Elizabeth once more.
"Lizzie, you look tired. Did you sleep well? I am sure your room must have been very comfortable." She sighed. "If only Longbourn was half so nice as Netherfield. Not that I am one to complain, for Longbourn is far grander than Lucas Lodge, and thanks to your generosity, I shall always call Longbourn my home."
Elizabeth's mother had a way of boasting of her own good fortune while slighting her friends and neighbours. In this case, Mrs. Bennet disparaged the neighbouring estate, the home of her friends Sir William and Lady Lucas. Elizabeth's closest friend next to Jane also lived there with her parents, Miss Charlotte Lucas. Charlotte was 27 and still single, which gave Mrs. Bennet something to boast about, for 2 of her daughters had married already, and not one of Lady Lucas's had. Elizabeth swallowed. "I slept very well, thank you, Mamma," she replied with a slight smile, trying to be as pleasant as possible.
"I am glad to hear that everything was to your satisfaction." Then, resuming her former attitude, she asked, "Did you know Mr. Collins has been looking for you to return from Netherfield all morning?"
"I have no doubt," said Elizabeth, hoping she did not sound rude. "Pray, pardon me, Mamma. I was just on my way upstairs to my apartment to rest a while."
"Rest? Lizzie, are you ill?"
"No, Mamma, I assure you I am quite well."
"If you are not feeling poorly, then why are you going to your room to rest? This is not like you at all. You are usually the one who is the first to rise and the last to retire. Shall I send for Mr. Jones?"
The door swung open before Elizabeth could object, and Mr. Collins burst into the room, his spirits unusually high. She had never seen him in such a mood in all the time she had known him.
"Elizabeth, my dear," he said, bowing before her. "How kind of you to grace us with your lovely presence today. I was hoping that you and I could have a talk," he said, as soon as he caught his breath.
Elizabeth did not like to encourage him. Talking to him was the surest means of thwarting her purposes, but he was her betrothed. It was the least she could do, she often told herself. "Yes, Mr. Collins, I am rather tired after my walk, and I thought it would be best to rest. Perhaps you could say what you have to say to me later, perhaps after dinner." Mr. Collins' countenance collapsed, and he looked rather young and more vulnerable than Elizabeth had ever seen him. Elizabeth suffered a tinge of guilt over her dislike of him. Was this feeling due to her leaving Mr. Darcy's bed mere hours earlier, after she and Mr. Darcy had awakened in each other's arms? How was she to go on despising Mr. Collins now that she bore such a secret that would ruin her family's chances of staying at Longbourn, where she found out? Collins's own duplicity came to Elizabeth's mind, adding to her conundrum. She thought she had heard Mr. Collins speaking of his being impotent with his valet, but what if she had been mistaken in what she thought she had heard? What if he had said he was important, importuned? Had she behaved as she had because of a misunderstanding? How would she ever know with certainty before they were actually wedded? I might ask, she silently considered. But what would be his incentive to tell me the truth? Elizabeth inwardly sighed. Now she really was in danger of a headache. Might he have said omnipotent? It would have been just like him to utter such nonsense. Elizabeth silently scoffed. "No, I am quite persuaded I heard him correctly. Mr. Collins is impotent."
"I am certain what I have to say cannot wait, for it is good news, indeed, something that must surely elevate everyone's spirits," said Mr. Collins.
"Good news?" asked Mrs. Bennet, who was getting a little impatient with the betrothed couple. She was hoping that her future son-in-law would say something about her second daughter and the gentleman's pending nuptials, no doubt.
"Indeed, I have the pleasure of having received a letter from my former benefactor, Lady Catherine de Bourgh, whom I previously informed of your good heart and the generosity of your nature," he said to Elizabeth.
"I suppose that is a sort of consolation," said Elizabeth, covering her mouth to mask a sardonic smile. The tales she had heard from Mr. Collins regarding the noble lady from Kent confirmed he was the most ridiculous man she had ever met.
"Yes, I am the recipient of her ladyship's benevolence once more, for she has bestowed her blessings onto our pending nuptials."
Elizabeth silently scoffed. "I am sure your happiness is now complete," she said. "Now, if you will excuse me—"
"If I might have the pleasure of more of your time, my dear, I have other news to impart. I am sure you will never guess what it is."
Elizabeth grew weary. Half smiling, she said, "I am certain I will never guess. Perhaps you will end my suspense by simply telling me." Mr. Collins started bouncing on the balls of his feet like a schoolboy and smiling.
"The Right Honourable Lady Catherine de Bourgh, and indeed the most benevolent person whom I have ever had the pleasure of knowing, also informed me that her esteemed relation, Mr. Fitzwilliam Darcy of Pemberley and Derbyshire, is to be a guest of Mr. Bingley and our own Mrs. Bingley. What a great honour this is for our family. He will be staying in Hertfordshire a month."
"Mr. Darcy!" Elizabeth cried, and immediately prayed that her manner of crying out the name of the gentleman whose very essence embraced every inch of her body, from her head to her toe, and everywhere in between, did not betray her. Mr. Collins nodded.
"Indeed, Mr. Fitzwilliam Darcy. Do you know Lady Catherine's dearest relative?"
Elizabeth did not know what to say. Would confessing she knew Mr. Darcy not require some explanation of how she knew the gentleman, all the particulars of their introduction, and under what circumstance? Speaking falsehoods was not something Elizabeth was in the habit of doing. Even though future circumstances might compel her to do so repeatedly, she did not mean to start at that very moment. Denying she knew the man whose bed she had left mere hours earlier was something she would not do either. She could not. Instead, she nodded.
"How is that possible?" Mr. Collins scratched his head. "Lady Catherine said Mr. Darcy would not be arriving before Wednesday."
I had the pleasure of speaking with him this morning at Netherfield. You will recall I had no choice but to spend the night at Jane's last evening, so that I might avoid being caught outside during a rainstorm. His countenance reflected his lingering confusion over Lady Catherine's intelligence.
Indeed, although I am certain the Bingleys would have made a carriage available to you had you insisted.
The last thing I wanted to do was inconvenience my sister and brother. So, no, I believe staying at Netherfield was the best thing I could do for everyone concerned. Elizabeth did not mean to make herself unhappy about what she had done. On the contrary, spending the night in Mr. Darcy's bed was a memory she would cherish for the rest of her life. Still, Mr. Collins' speech gave her something to think of. A month, she silently considered. Mr. Darcy will be here in Hertfordshire for a month. Elizabeth did not know whether that was a bad thing or a good thing. She leaned heavily toward the latter.
How fortunate you are to have enjoyed such a pleasure. Come, Elizabeth, you must tell me everything there is to know regarding your meeting Mr. Darcy. He brushed by Elizabeth, intending to sit on the sofa, and then paused. On second thought, I feel it is incumbent upon me to go to Netherfield Park straight away.
Elizabeth's heart slammed against her chest. But, sir, you must not intrude on the gentleman so soon after his arrival. He will surely think of it as impertinent.
Nonsense! It is not as though Mr. Darcy and I are wholly unacquainted, and as a former clergyman I am obliged to repeat my condolences on the loss of his wife, the late Mrs. Anne Darcy, née de Burgh, and to welcome him to the neighbourhood. I suppose you ought to come with me.
Elizabeth could not hide her surprise. Mr. Darcy is a widower? The question reverberated in her thoughts over and over. A bevy of sentiments overtook her, a new awareness of the gentleman with whom she had suffered both agony and ecstasy.
Yes, I am afraid so. His late wife passed during her lying in. It was a most harrowing time for all concerned. Mr. Darcy was in agony. I have never heard of a man to suffer the loss of a wife so painfully as he did. No doubt, he simply did not want to face life without her. As Lady Catherine often asserted, the two of them were made for each other. Everyone who knew his late wife knew what an exceptional woman she was. She was a most charming young lady indeed. Lady Catherine, herself, always espoused that, in point of true beauty, her daughter was far superior to the most handsome of her sex, because there was that in her features which marked the young lady of distinguished birth.
Elizabeth was not immune to Mr. Collins's commendations on Mr. Darcy's deceased wife. She did not know how to look or feel as the drone of the other two voices in the room allowed a moment's reflection. It was not as though she had not entertained the idea of Mr. Darcy's being a widower. He hinted as much when we were together last night, did he not? However, Mr. Collins's accounting of the young woman's passing was oddly disquieting to Elizabeth, and not at all in keeping with Mr. Darcy's, albeit vague, innuendo. At length Elizabeth spoke. "As I have met Mr. Darcy already," she said, trying to drown out her own conflicting feelings, "I do not know that it is necessary that I call on Netherfield with you."
Very well. I shall go to Netherfield Park and express condolences on our behalf. However, I assure you, Elizabeth, I fully intend to extend Longbourn's hospitality to the gentleman by inviting him to dine here as soon as his schedule permits. I think I should make that my highest priority, for I am certain many of our neighbours are of a like mind. It would be a boon if one of my fair cousins attracted the gentleman's notice.
Elizabeth swallowed hard. Mrs. Bennet, as though suddenly realising the significance of this intelligence, said,
I always knew Jane's marriage would be the means of throwing her younger sisters in the paths of wealthy gentlemen. She set her sewing things aside and sprang to her feet. I shall gather Mary, Kitty, and Lydia, and see that they don their best frocks. We shall all go to Netherfield Park at once.
Mr. Collins nodded.
No doubt a man of Mr. Darcy's standing will be eager to find a new wife to give him an heir. He is blessed, in a peculiar way, with everything the heart of mortal can most desire: splendid property, noble kindred, and extensive patronage. Here, he paused and turned to Elizabeth. Although my cousins are silly and can hardly be worthy of such a fine man, we must all do our parts to promote a potential alliance between our families for good measure. What say you?
Chapter 4. Mr. Darcy had married his cousin Anne, seeking to carry out the favourite wish of his mother, the late Lady Anne Darcy, and her sister, Lady Catherine de Bourgh, Anne's mother. From your infancy, we have intended you for each other. Both he and his cousin had grown up listening to those often recited words. They did not consummate the marriage. Darcy went into the marriage knowing Anne would not live much longer, knowing she would never bear children, and knowing he needed an heir. He devoted what little remained of her time to caring for her. He bore his fair share of grief when she passed away, for the two had known each other all their lives. All she asked was that he remain faithful to her till the end. He could do that. Despite her situation and her inability to be a wife to him in every way, she deserved that much. His late mother would be pleased that he had honoured her favourite wish. His aunt, nay, his mother-in-law certainly was pleased. His cousin Anne was an inspiration to all who met her. Although frail and of a sickly constitution, she was a gracious young lady. Though quiet, she was intelligent and very fair-minded. Though subdued, she was brave. She had suffered so much, yet she had the grace to accept her fate with dignity. How could he do anything less than honour her until the very end? Darcy was now in control of two great estates with the marriage, Pemberley in Derbyshire and Rosings Park in Kent. He needed to beget an heir now more than ever. All his noble relations, especially Lady Catherine de Bourgh, were adamant on that point. Now he was a widower, at 28, and comporting himself as though he was still in mourning and in no particular rush to do anything. It was not so much the loss of Anne that had affected him. He had never been one to enjoy the London season. Matchmaking mammas and simpering single daughters, young women eager to say or do anything that might garner his attention. He had never hidden the fact that he preferred the outdoors to the drawing-room, his estate to London, his solitary pursuits to those of the tune. When Anne died within months of the marriage, her ladyship was the first to insist that her son-in-law mourn a respectable period. Then he must go about the business of finding a new wife, preferably someone in her ladyship's image, a young lady who was of noble birth, wealthy, beautiful. Always one to carry her point, her ladyship commenced promoting potential prospects. Rather than remain in England and subject himself to Lady Catherine's machinations, he went to Scotland, where he spent most of his time in solitude. His subsequent return found him as uninterested in the pleasures and amusements of society as before he left. All too often, when society debutantes with nary a brain cell to their bitty heads would smile invitingly at him, he looked right through them, as if they were not even there. This picture of himself that he presented to the world was most disconcerting to his family, especially his young sister Georgiana, who was his junior by more than a decade. She made it her mission to see her brother return to his former self. Sentiments such as "Anne would not want you to carry on this way" were a favourite refrain. Young Georgiana was forced to remind him of his responsibilities to his estate, his position in society, his family, and most importantly to her. "Please, brother," Darcy recalled her saying, "I beg of you, take an interest in something. Think of all that you have yet to accomplish. The world will not stop whirling if you accept an invitation to dine or attend a ball. Why, I posit such diversions will do you a steady bit of good." Darcy knew he had his sister to thank for his being in Hertfordshire. So eager was Georgiana to see her brother resume his place in society that she wrote a letter to his friend Charles Bingley. By the time he found out about his sister's scheme, he had no choice but to go along with it and accept Bingley's extended invitation to visit his country home. Now, in a small hamlet outside of London, of all places, he had met the most fascinating woman, someone whom he could envision spending the rest of his life with as the mistress of his homes and the mother of his children. A woman who had also suffered the loss of a spouse before they consummated their union. A woman who just happened to be betrothed to another. Darcy had never had an affair before. He knew it would not be an easy road to travel, but Elizabeth was the woman with whom he wanted to share his bed. He had to marry again, but the thought of being with another woman the way he was with Elizabeth, he was not sure if he could. She's engaged to marry another, That hurdle was the only thing that would keep him from completely surrendering himself to Elizabeth. The whole thing seemed unreal. Could he really have fallen in love with someone so quickly and so easily? Their lovemaking was passionate, yet tender. It was breathtaking. She had given him such fulfillment as he had never known. When she left him earlier, his body ached, and his heart felt such yearning. Her scent was all around him, filling him with wanting. Thoughts of Elizabeth aroused his desire so much that he soon imagined himself in her arms again. There was no use in denying what he wanted. After last night, Darcy ached for Elizabeth. His mind was racing with questions, thoughts of her, of them, of what could be. But she was not there. He lay there feeling so empty, so alone. "Elizabeth," he whispered. The name of his sweet lover hung on his lips like a drug. His mind drifted off to thoughts of her in his arms. His mind lingered on these memories. The memories fueled his desires. Her face, her smile, was clear to him, as if she were with him. He ached to hold her. He imagined his hands were hers. "Oh, Elizabeth!" Darcy wanted nothing more than to be with her again, and even though he knew nothing of what the future would bring, he could no longer think of it without thinking of her. He could not wait for her to return to Netherfield under the guise of visiting her sister. He had spent the bulk of his time, since her leave-taking, visiting with his friend Bingley, thinking of ways to find out all there was to know about Elizabeth, her likes, her dislikes. How far away from Netherfield was Longbourn? He and Bingley rode along the outskirts of the Netherfield Park estate, and Bingley pointed out the route Elizabeth often took when coming by foot to see Mrs. Bingley. Armed with this intelligence, Darcy made up his mind to rectify his longing to see Elizabeth again. "I will wait no longer. I shall go to Longbourn to see her." He knew that he shouldn't just barge into Longbourn looking for her as though he was within his rights to do so. He needed a reasonable excuse. "Hopefully I will think of one by the time I arrive at Elizabeth's doorstep."
Chapter 5. Elizabeth did not go with the rest of the Longbourn party to Netherfield Park. However, not much time passed before she second-guessed her decision to stay behind. What if her family should make a spectacle of themselves? What am I thinking? As ridiculous as my family can be, they will undoubtedly make fools of themselves. Mr. Collins was not incorrect in saying my younger sisters are silly. Elizabeth's own father had always prided himself on the exact observation. Hearing my own father speak those words never bothered me. I would be hypocritical to refute Mr. Collins for espousing a similar sentiment. On the other hand, who is Mr. Collins to criticise anyone for being ridiculous? Knowing the foolish man was likely standing before Mr. Darcy at that very moment, singing her praises and congratulating himself on the prospects of his future felicity in marriage, were too much for Elizabeth to bear. She headed down the steps and almost upended the servant who was holding a basket on the way up the stairs. "Pray pardon me," Elizabeth exclaimed with energy. She hurried on. "I must go to Netherfield Park," she heard herself say to anyone who would hear her as she threw open the front door. Elizabeth opened it to find a tall, handsome man standing on the other side. Her heart slammed against her chest. He nearly stole her breath away with his brooding good looks. His jaw was firm, clean-shaven and chiselled. Hints of sandalwood and spices flooded her senses. She wished she could throw herself into his arms. "Mr. Darcy!"
"Mrs. Tillman, what a delightful surprise. I trust you are well," he said, with the usual half-bow and charming smile Elizabeth admired.
Elizabeth's eyes darted from his lips to his eyes and back again. "Oh yes, I am quite well. Thank you for asking. Sir, what are you doing here?" Her cheeks began to burn as his eyes grew wide. After a moment of silence, he stepped in and closed the door. He looked around the foyer.
"Do you have to ask? I came to see you. I had to see you. Is there some place I might talk in privacy with you?"
"You want to talk, sir? How interesting." He nodded.
"Yes, I want to talk. That, among other things. There is so much I have yet to know about you."
"I want to know so much more about you too," Elizabeth answered, in a much more serious tone. "I have a few questions," Elizabeth continued, as she tried composing herself in the wake of his unexpectedly being there. "Let me take you someplace quiet where we can talk." Then her eyes brightened. "I know. I will show you the conservatory." Elizabeth nearly grabbed Mr. Darcy by the hand until she thought better of it. No one else was in view, but she released it all the same, opting to be careful, just in case. "Follow me," she said. They exited the house through a door just past the study, walked no more than a few steps along a brick path, and arrived at their destination. Elizabeth pushed open the glass-pane door, and after allowing her guest to enter, she closed it and turned the key left inside the lock. A banquet of fresh scents and vibrant colours abounded. In the centre of the structure, a fountain burbled with water, adding to its tranquillity. Elizabeth took a couple of steps and turned to face Mr. Darcy. "I cannot vouch for its comfort, but it is quite private."
"I see you lock the door."
"Yes, well, it is more of a habit. No one ever comes here but me. This was once my father's favourite place aside from his study. He oversaw its construction himself. Now it is my own private sanctuary."
"Do you mind?" Mr. Darcy asked, removing his jacket. "It is rather hot in here."
The warm weather allowed for fresh air circulation with the greenhouse windows open, but he was correct. It was still rather hot inside. While watching Mr. Darcy remove his jacket, Elizabeth attributed the heat to more than her environs, especially when he loosened his cravat. "Pray, make yourself comfortable, sir," she said, smiling and then looking away. Her busy mind filled in the blanks of what she was missing. Upon glancing back, she noticed Mr. Darcy had folded his jacket and tucked it over his arm as though wanting to shield his modesty. "By the by," Elizabeth said, "perchance you saw my family at Netherfield. Pray, tell me I do not owe you an apology on anyone's behalf."
"I did see your family, as a matter of fact, but as soon as I learned you had not arrived with them, I made my excuses and escaped the room."
Elizabeth bit her lower lip. Thoughts of what he must think, knowing she was engaged to a man like Mr. Collins, could not help but intrude. She also remembered what Mr. Collins had said earlier about Mr. Darcy's late wife. "Sir, you no doubt encountered Mr. Collins. He told me about your late wife. I am so sorry for your loss." Mr. Darcy nodded.
"I wanted to be the one who told you. I fear your learning about Anne's death from anyone other than me might lead to misunderstanding."
"Mr. Collins spoke of your late wife having died from complications during childbirth, and your being by her side until the end. He said you were quite distraught, as one must well imagine. What is there to misunderstand?"
"It is true I was by her side until the very end. It is also true I was distraught. Anne was my cousin, and I loved her dearly. However, it is not true that she died during childbirth, for she was never with child. As I told you last night, our marriage was never consummated. I did not want you to think I had misled you."
"Why would Mr. Collins spread such a falsehood?" Darcy shrugged.
"I do not know that I can blame him. People tend to believe what they wish to believe. Lady Catherine could never countenance that her only child was of a sickly constitution. It was easier for her to attribute Anne's death to something that would not render her the subject of anyone's pity. It was more palatable for Lady Catherine to embrace the lie and allow others to do so."
But you said you loved her, did you not?" Elizabeth asked, feigning more interest in a large potted plant than was warranted. The thought of Mr. Darcy having loved another, even a deceased wife, was oddly disconcerting. Mr. Darcy nodded again.
"I did. Perhaps not in the way a man ought to love the woman with whom he chooses to spend his life, but love her I did, as one would love a dear relation. Anne and I were cousins. We have always been close. Our family desired the union. For as long as I can remember, I was told that our marriage was the favourite wish of her mother as well as my own. When I learned how much Anne herself was depending on it too, even as her life was slipping away, I did what I had to do. I married her."
By then, Darcy was standing directly beside Elizabeth, so close that she reached out and placed her hand on his chin. "I am so sorry." He covered her hand with his.
"You're very kind." Then he threw a glance about his surroundings, taking in the scenery. "So, this is your own private sanctuary?"
"Indeed," Elizabeth said, lowering her hand and looking about at the parade of plants and flowers her father had curated over the years. The lush greenery abounded and lent scarcely a view of the outside world, save bursts of sun shining from up above. She took such joy in maintaining what she deemed her late father's legacy. This was yet another reason she wanted to retain her place as mistress of Longbourn. "Shall I give you a tour?" Mr. Darcy laid his jacket on a nearby work table and accepted Elizabeth's outstretched hand. He listened with keen attention as she pointed out many of her favourite plants and shared knowledgeable insights along the way. After a while, Elizabeth stood on the tip of her toes to reach a hanging basket with flowers that needed immediate tending. Mr. Darcy stood behind her and placed his hand on the small of her back. Then he reached out with his free hand.
"Let me help you with that."
His body brushed against hers, sending a frisson of desire straight to her core. Then, turning, she found herself in his arms. Their lips met, and their passions soared. Mr. Darcy swept Elizabeth up in his arms. He meant to please her in such a manner she would not soon forget. At length he whispered in her ear.
"Are you planning to return to Netherfield Park later? Perhaps to spend the night? I hope you are."
Elizabeth sighed, a sigh of relief mixed with something else. Thinking it was uncertainty that she was feeling, Mr. Darcy said,
"What is the matter?"
"I do not know," she began. "After observing Caroline's behaviour this morning, I'm not sure I am in the mood for a repeat performance of her antics."
"Surely you are no stranger to her antics by now."
"True. Suffice it to say, we have little tolerance for each other."
"Then what has changed?"
"Seeing her possessiveness toward you is troubling, to say the least." Elizabeth let her hand glide over the bare skin of Mr. Darcy's chest. It slid across his ribs and along his sternum until it came to rest against his heart. "I do not know how to describe it," she said, in a voice that was barely above a whisper. "I fear she will do something rash to garner your attention." Elizabeth's fingers lingered on Mr. Darcy's bare chest. His heartbeat was strong, steady, and comforting. "I can well imagine," Elizabeth began, "her spending the bulk of the evening chasing you around the room. After what just happened between us, I cannot say that I would blame her."
"Pray do not let Caroline Bingley be your excuse. In fact, if you're in want of an excuse, let it be your desire to rescue me from the likes of such a woman that compels you to come and save me."
Mr. Darcy swept his hand through Elizabeth's long, dark hair.
"Come to Netherfield tonight, and we shall finish what we've started here in your sanctuary."
"I shall think about it." Mr. Darcy kissed Elizabeth on her cheek and eased her off his lap. Then, standing, he commenced tying his cravat.
"Would you have me beg?"
No, Elizabeth said. "Let me help with that," she offered, seizing either end of his cravat.
"I am more than capable of tying my cravat."
"I do not doubt your capability in any regard," Elizabeth replied. "However, I shall not have you accuse me of bringing you here and subjecting you to manual labour." Mr. Darcy half smiled.
"You are too generous."
"I can be," she teased.
"Prove it," Mr. Darcy said. "Come, spend the night with me."
Chapter 6. There was no question that Elizabeth would come. Lying in Mr. Darcy's arms that night, long after the rest of the household had settled, Elizabeth was precisely where she wanted to be. It amazed her how much she enjoyed being with him. Even though Jane had gone along at her mother's insistence, to the point of embarrassment, to invite Elizabeth's entire family to stay for dinner, and even though Caroline Bingley had been insufferable all night, Elizabeth still thought her evening with Mr. Darcy was worth it. For reasons Elizabeth dared not to disclose to Jane just yet, she too had prevailed on Jane's good nature by having Jane invite her to spend the night. How might she go about confiding her reasoning to anyone, even a most beloved sister, that she and Netherfield's newest houseguest were enjoying a love affair? Not that anyone ought to expect Elizabeth to be chaste. She was a widow after all. However, there was the inconvenience of Elizabeth's betrothal. Would her sister Jane understand Elizabeth's plight? Elizabeth decided she had to keep her secret from everyone, at least for the time being. Besides, no one should have been surprised Elizabeth remained behind that evening, since Elizabeth was always staying at Netherfield. The more incredible surprise would have been if she had returned to Longbourn with the rest of her family and her ridiculous betrothed, Mr. Collins. However, a rather unexpected consequence of the evening had been Elizabeth's growing awareness of the true nature of the man lying next to her. Mr. Darcy was quite a haughty man. Not that he is not within his right to be, she considered, recounting all she had learned about him. Mr. Collins had not exaggerated when speaking of his being blessed with all the heart of mortal man could desire. Elizabeth heard Caroline Bingley say that Mr. Darcy had more than £10,000 a year before his marriage. Who was to say how wealthy he was in the wake of his late wife's death? For she had been an heiress in her own right. Elizabeth recalled almost cringing inside when her mother also heard of Mr. Darcy's vast wealth and set about singing her two youngest daughters' praises to the gentleman. She was sure he must deem her family an army of mercenaries. First, Jane had married his wealthy friend. Elizabeth herself was marrying the heir of her family's estate as a means to an end, having nothing to do with affection. And there was Mrs. Bennet, auctioning off her youngest daughters. Thoughts of what Mr. Darcy must think of her sisters could not help but encroach on Elizabeth's mind as well, thanks in part to Caroline Bingley and her meddling ways. The annoying fellow houseguest had gone on and on in her effusive praise of Mr. Darcy's young sister, Miss Georgiana Darcy, as though doing so might garner his approbation. She lauded Miss Darcy's beauty and poise and her extraordinary musical acumen, implying without actually saying the younger Bennet daughters were severely wanting in comparison. Not that she needed to, what with Mary's insistence on exhibiting on the pianoforte, unknowingly, to most everyone's displeasure, and Lydia, with her wild animal spirits, flittering about the room from one moment to the next, and Kitty traipsing along at her heels. Elizabeth could have sworn she detected Mr. Darcy rolling his eyes more than a few times throughout the evening. That was to say, when he was not being taciturn and aloof. He is nothing at all like that when it is just the two of us. Elizabeth brushed her hand across Mr. Darcy's chest. What other mysteries have I yet to learn about this man? Mr. Darcy stirred. He opened his eyes.
"Elizabeth," he whispered.
"Mr. Darcy." He coaxed Elizabeth astride his body, letting her know he was completely in her power.
"For a moment I thought I was dreaming."
"I am here."
"I want you so badly," he whispered, poised for a repetition of their love-making.
"I am here."
"Elizabeth, I feel as though I have dreamed of you for years."
"I feel the same way." Their eyes held fixed. It felt so good to be held in his arms, enjoying his tender ministrations. Elizabeth knew what his efforts were leading to. She kissed his ear. "You are so amazing," Elizabeth murmured, brushing her warm breath on his cheek. She felt as though she had been waiting for him all her life, and the wait had been well worth it. Mr. Darcy made a sound halfway between a moan and a sigh, an intoxicating melody Elizabeth was sure she would never grow tired of.
"Elizabeth."
"I am here," she whispered softly, feeling more cherished than she had ever felt in her life, and energized by the realization that their night was a long way from ending.
Chapter 7. Another evening found the Longbourn party at Netherfield again, the fifth in as many days as it seemed. All Mrs. Bennet's attempts to put her younger daughters in Mr. Darcy's path were in vain. He only had eyes for Elizabeth. Try as he might, he could hardly tear his eyes away from her, and he was always looking for reasons to be close to her. If his friend Bingley supposed Darcy was spending more time in Elizabeth's company than he spent with anyone else since his arrival, Bingley kept it to himself. If only the same could be said for Bingley's younger sister, who was always teasing Darcy about his newfound admiration for the young widow Mrs. Tillman. Darcy could honestly say that he was glad for the recent arrival of Bingley's other relations, Mr. Randall Hurst and his wife, Mrs. Louisa Hurst, Bingley's older sister. They were not Darcy's friends, but their presence gave Miss Bingley someone to bother besides himself. Still, these frequent gatherings between the Netherfield and Longbourn parties were a trial for Darcy's patience, for he wanted only to be alone with Elizabeth. When he could, Darcy walked to where Elizabeth was standing. Feigning interest in the painting she was admiring, he said, "I cannot begin to tell you how much I have missed you. Is it my imagination, or have you been going out of your way to avoid me all evening?" Elizabeth said,
"Sir, I do not know what else I can do other than avoid you as best I can."
"You did not call on Netherfield earlier today either. Please do not feel that you have to avoid your sister on my behalf."
He was standing so close enough to brush fingers against each other's, had they chosen. Elizabeth could not keep her eyes from poring all over Mr. Darcy's person, his increasing discomfort and all. Finally, he arrested her eyes by putting his hands in his breeches pockets. "Pardon my stare, sir. I suppose that is just another reason it is best that you and I keep our distance. Were I a man, my desire for you would be just as obvious, I assure you."
"Then what say we do something about it?"
"What do you have in mind?" Elizabeth asked, her spirits arising in mischief.
"Meet me."
"Where shall I meet you, sir?"
"Meet me in the library for a few moments."
"A few moments, Mr. Darcy?" Elizabeth asked, her brow arched.
"Long enough for what I have in mind."
"Do you not suppose we run the risk of discovery?"
"In all the time I've been here, I've seen no one other than myself go near the place."
Elizabeth was not confident they could both leave undetected, and she told him so. He shrugged.
"I shall make the excuse of wanting to go horse riding before the sun sets or whatever comes to mind. Then, after I am gone, you ought to be able to slip away with the excuse of refreshing yourself."
A half-hour later, the two of them sat on a sofa behind locked doors. What they shared was merely a precursor meant to tease, even gratify, not fully sate.
"Are you spending the night at Netherfield?"
"No," she said, almost apologetically.
"Meet me in the morning," he said, holding her tightly, "on your morning walk. As incredible as this feels, I fear it is only the tip of what I truly mean to bestow. Say you will." "Meet me," he repeated. The ensuing days and nights were a blur filled with blissful interludes. Darcy's mind dwelt on their pastimes together whenever they were apart. Lying alone in his bed with his head resting on his clutched hands, Darcy remembered their being together on an especially beautiful day. The sun had shone brightly, the warmth of it caressing his face. Elizabeth's hair flowed freely, the sunlight catching it. He remembered those dark, wispy locks, causing his heart to feel as though it would beat out of his chest. He had taken off his coat and handed it to her, giving her the task of holding it while he slipped his arm around her waist, his hand reaching up and cupping her soft cheek. How perfect her skin had looked against his fingers, tanned from being in the sun. He could still remember how her cheeks had had that rosy-flushed glow that made her look so lovely. He remembered it all as if it was just that morning. Even when he closed his eyes, he could see Elizabeth. He could hear her laughter, see her smile, hear her squeal in delight as they cavorted in the open meadow, frolicking amid the tall grass and enjoying each other's presence, while relishing the sense of freedom that the outdoors afforded. Darcy was in danger of falling in love with Elizabeth, a woman he might never truly have the way things presently stood. He could not let himself fall for her completely, for she was betrothed to another, but a man could not deny the sparks he felt every time he was around her. It was like they had known each other forever. Days had passed since his last time with Elizabeth, though she did not always return to Longbourn with the rest of the party when they concluded their visits to Netherfield. That annoying Mr. Collins had insisted she return to Longbourn that last time, owing to looming threats of heavy rainfall. Darcy had not seen her since. He did not like the idea of visiting Longbourn, especially after having been forced to converse with Collins for nearly a half-hour during his last visit. Still, there were times when it was absolutely necessary if he wished to keep his wits. This was one of those times. Even if he did nothing else but look at her, it would be enough. How fortunate it would be if the two of them found themselves alone for a few minutes, long enough for him to take her in his arms and satiate a modicum of his aching desire for the taste of her skin and warmth of her nearness with a lingering kiss. Elizabeth must surely suffer the same aching desire for him. They had not seen each other for days because of unrelenting downpours. At last the rain had stopped, the skies were blue, and Darcy could wait no longer.
Chapter 8. A surfeit of rainy days had conspired to keep Elizabeth and the rest of the Longbourn household away from Netherfield Park, much to her disappointment and partly her delight. She hated the spectacle her mother, younger sisters, and Mr. Collins always made of themselves in their vain attempts to garner Mr. Darcy's approbation. She felt almost bad for him, the way he sat quietly, almost rudely, aloof from conversation. Elizabeth suspected she might have to share too much of his attention with others if he were half as amiable as his friend Charles Bingley. Elizabeth wanted to have the gentleman all to herself whenever they were near, hence her reason for declining the invitation to join the others when they called on Netherfield that day. While meditating on this point, she was suddenly roused by the sound of the doorbell, and her spirits grew quite lively when she saw the gentleman of her musings walk into the room. "You, sir, have a most uncanny knack for calling here at Longbourn when the rest of my family is away at Netherfield," Elizabeth said when the servant quit the room.
Imagine that.
"A coincidence, no doubt."
No doubt, Mr. Darcy repeated, throwing a glance around the room.
"Please sit. I'm hoping you will have tea and refreshments." Sitting herself, her cheeks flushed as a result of his unexpected yet welcomed arrival.
Yes, tea would be nice. He sat and reached for her hand. That is, as long as you would care to join me, would you?
Freeing her hand, Elizabeth felt her colour rising. "Oh, yes, I shall. I had just called for tea before your arrival." Moments later, a servant appeared, set up the table, and withdrew just as quickly. Elizabeth spent the next few minutes preparing the tea things while trying to get her feelings under control. Unfortunately, the ensuing silence did not help, especially when Mr. Darcy studied her every move the way he did. Upon handing her guest the cup, she said, "Mr. Darcy, I did not expect to see you here today."
Does that surprise you?
"Yes, it does a bit. Not that you are unwelcome. Quite the contrary. What is more, it is quite fortunate that you found me here in this particular parlour, for other than Jane and I, no one else ever comes here."
"I consider that good information to have at my disposal," he said. Then after sipping his tea, he placed his cup aside.
"Is the tea not to your liking, sir?"
"I thought we might talk."
Her eyes grew wide. "I can think of no better pastime. We always seem to find other rather agreeable means of passing our time together than engaging in intercourse. There is much we have yet to learn about each other."
"Yes, I agree." He nodded, his eyes trailing down to her lips.
Elizabeth realised he was looking at her lips, and she smiled. "Am I distracting you?"
Only in the most delightful of ways. There were many things I had planned to discuss with you, but I find I have nothing to say except how wonderful your lips look.
He leaned over and brushed them with the tip of his finger.
And they are wonderfully soft, too, to say nothing of their taste.
The contact was so light she could barely feel his finger against her lips. She smiled. Leaning closer, he asked,
"May I?"
"I would like that very much." Mr. Darcy held Elizabeth's face in his hands and paused for a moment. Her eyes were fixated on his brooding, dark, beautiful eyes. 1,000 thoughts were racing through her head. He brushed his nose against hers, his breath hot on her skin. Her heart pounded in her chest as he moved in to kiss her. He brushed his lips atop hers.
"I do not know what it is about you, about being here with you. You have bewitched me, body and soul. I want you. I can scarcely make it through the day or night without my arms around you." His eyes locked on hers. "I want to be with you."
Elizabeth's body grew warm and flushed, listening to his voice. The soft way it rolled off his tongue took her breath away. A small sigh escaped her lips. It was permission. "I want that too." Her whisper was just audible.
"Tell me what you want, Elizabeth."
Elizabeth's gaze darted up to Darcy's and then down to the dark blue fabric of his waistcoat and lower still. "I would like very much to please you, Mr. Darcy," she said in a quiet voice.
"I have no qualms with that. You can do whatever you like."
His words were cut short. He sucked in a breath. "Whatever I like?"
"Yes, whatever you like. To touch, to explore, to please."
She looked up at his face. Her lips were parted and her cheeks were flushed. She leaned forward a bit and pressed her lips against his shirt, then lifted her head to look at him again. "Does this please you, Mr. Darcy?" He nodded. "Shall I do more?" Elizabeth asked as she continued carrying her point. He sucked in another deep breath. It was now Elizabeth's turn to lay the tip of her finger on Mr. Darcy's soft lips. "Pray, hold that thought," she said, standing.
"Where are you going?"
"To lock the door."
"You said no one uses this room but you and your older sister."
"I did indeed," Elizabeth said upon resuming her former attitude. "However, I can think of no more inconvenient time to be proved wrong. Do you not agree, Mr. Darcy?"
Chapter 9. Leisurely sunny days spent getting to know each other, and passionate starry nights spent making love turned into weeks before Darcy and Elizabeth even realised it. Upon discovering each other's penchant for reading, they spent long hours locked in heated debate on the merits of a particular author, and further bonded over their wont to challenge each other's opinions on favourite books. There were new discoveries to be made each day, and ideas to be explored, such as their love of nature and art and music. Still, their mutual desires never far from their minds. One day, the two of them were sitting side by side on a wooden bench in a secluded alcove hidden behind a thick stand of trees. It was the sort of day that felt centuries old. The air smelled fresh and clean, and the only breeze was a gentle one, but when it came, it carried the scent of honeysuckle, sweet and subtle. Darcy placed his hand on Elizabeth's and squeezed it gently. "I can hardly wait for tonight."
"As much as I like to suppose otherwise, we cannot always be spending our nights in each other's arms, sir."
"I do not know why we cannot, as long as we continue to be discreet." Elizabeth gave Mr. Darcy a look. "There are ways I might satisfy you that will not yield unintended consequences, as you well know by now, nor should your pleasure be impeded by certain natural occurrences, if either is what concerns you."
"And what of your own pleasure?"
"My pleasure."
"You once admitted being a selfish man, did you not?" Elizabeth said, alluding to a conversation they once shared when she accused him of being haughty with respect to his opinion of others relative to himself.
"However, I'm not selfish where your pleasure is concerned," he said.
"Indeed, you are quite generous in that regard. How shall I ever repay you?"
"Might I have the pleasure of holding you in my arms tonight and the night after that?"
"Sir, you are incorrigible."
"Shall I take that as yes?"
"I shall try my best, but no promises. I fear Mr. Collins is beginning to question my always being at Netherfield, to say nothing of my mother, who believes our family's interests will be best served were one of my younger sisters to frequent Netherfield in my stead." Here Elizabeth consulted her watch. "I am afraid it is time for me to return to the manor house. I promised Jane I would spend time with her before returning to Longbourn."
"You go on ahead, Elizabeth," Mr. Darcy said, releasing her hand.
"Are you certain, Mr. Darcy? Surely the prospect of the two of us arriving at the manor house at the same time is not the most scandalous thing someone might accuse us of."
"Who knows, Elizabeth?" Mr. Darcy said, his tone altered, his eyes brooding.
"What is that supposed to mean?"
"Nothing," he said. "It means nothing."
A quarter-hour later found Elizabeth sitting in her sister's particular parlour with Jane and her guest, Elizabeth's intimate friend, Miss Charlotte Lucas. What a delightful surprise this was for Elizabeth, for Charlotte had been away visiting relatives, and the three women had not spent time with one another in months. Despite their delightful reunion, Elizabeth's mind was busily engaged in pondering other matters. She would have been lying if she said her earlier parting with Mr. Darcy had not given her pause, but with so much to conceal from two of the people who meant the most to her, she had no choice but to keep her concerns to herself, sip her tea, and pretend she was not happier than she had ever been in her entire life, the happiest as well as the most tormented. My love affair with Mr. Darcy is so wrong, and yet it feels so right. Elizabeth's friend's return was a mixed blessing, for Charlotte was shrewd. If she and Elizabeth had been in company all those past weeks, Charlotte would have known Elizabeth was harbouring a secret. Even if Jane suspected something, she would not speak of her suspicions to anyone, including Elizabeth. Elizabeth could not say the same about Charlotte, who was the pragmatist among them.
You seem more content than I've ever seen you.
Charlotte set her teacup back on the saucer, glancing over uncertainly at Elizabeth as she did so. "Whatever do you mean?" Elizabeth asked.
It is difficult for me to say. The last time we were together you seemed less spirited. I would say, even downhearted. But look at you now.
As if she was not feeling heated enough, the sun's rays seeped through the gaps in the drapes and slanted across Elizabeth's face. Elizabeth placed her hand on her cheek. She hoped she did not look as discomforted as she felt. "I have been exerting myself with greater alacrity of late," she started, "taking longer walks every day and what not."
That must be what it is. Charlotte eyed her friend with concern and a touch of humour. But then again, you have always been an excellent walker, which makes me wonder if there is another explanation for your revived spirits.
"Charlotte, what are you implying?"
Pray, Eliza, I am only teasing you. Why, I have only your best interests at heart, and seeing this change in you is a joy to behold. Charlotte took another sip of her tea. By the by, Jane was speaking to me of Netherfield's house guest, Mr. Darcy. Although Jane's commendations were far more measured than my mother's, I fear Mama is just as excited over there being a single man of a large fortune in the neighbourhood as your own mother must be.
"Indeed, as it is the business of my mother's life to get rid of all of us," Elizabeth conceded. Charlotte nodded.
Pray, is Mr. Darcy as handsome as he is proclaimed to be?
Elizabeth could feel the colour spread all over her body. Handsome. Here was a man blessed with all the best parts of beauty, and she had seen and touched most every inch. Elizabeth swallowed. "You're asking me?"
Am I to believe that because you are engaged to marry Mr. Collins, you are oblivious to other men and all their charms?
Oblivious to other men? Elizabeth's thoughts were far more of Mr. Darcy than of the gentleman to whom she was betrothed. All she did of late was think of Mr. Darcy. She imagined herself dancing with him at a ball. She imagined herself talking with him as they walked together down a long winding path under a canopy of trees. She imagined herself snuggled against his side. Elizabeth coughed a little. "I would not say that." She threw a glance at Jane, who had been silently taking in the discourse, hoping her sister would enjoy a share of the conversation. It was all she could do not to pour her heart out to Charlotte regarding her opinion of her secret lover. Charlotte said,
It is not a tough question. Either Mr. Darcy is as handsome as my mother says he is, or he is not. What say you?
"I dare say he is," Elizabeth confessed. Emboldened, she added, "I dare say Mr. Darcy is the handsomest man whom I have ever laid eyes on." Charlotte sipped her tea.
That was not so hard, was it?
"Perhaps not," Elizabeth allowed.
That leads me to my next question. Is Mr. Darcy amiable?
"Here," Jane interceded. "Mr. Darcy is my husband's closest friend. How can he not be amiable? Charles declares Mr. Darcy is one of the best men he knows, and I have seen no evidence to refute his assertion." "And there you have it, Charlotte. Surely your interrogation is now complete," Elizabeth said. Charlotte sat back and smiled smugly.
"As you wish, Eliza. Shall we discuss other things?"
"Yes, we shall," Elizabeth said, glad that was the end of that. Part of her felt Charlotte knew more than she was letting on, or maybe it was just as Charlotte had said, and she was merely teasing Elizabeth. Whatever was the case, Elizabeth knew in the future she had to be far more guarded if she were to continue to conceal the truth.
Chapter 10. Fitzwilliam Darcy was only meant to be in Hertfordshire for a month. He had put off his departure more than once, but he could not expect to stay in Hertfordshire indefinitely, and this fact was becoming the hardest to bear. He was no youngster to waste his time in idleness. The time was fast approaching when he would have to choose between the life of a gentleman of independent means or taking an active role in the running of his Pemberley and Rosings estates, and yes, to marry and beget an heir. Elizabeth's steadfastness in her farce of an engagement did not make things any easier for him. Darcy had never fancied himself a gambling man, yet he had gambled his own heart with her. Gambled and lost. Elizabeth's words of sacrificing her own happiness for the sake of her family were proving more unsound by the day. Darcy dared not deny her attachment to her family home, and neither could he blame her. But what difference would it make if she were to live the rest of her days in misery of the acutest kind owing to stubbornness on her part to hold on to the past? The time had come. Darcy was quite prepared to take his leave, to settle for a life devoid of the sort of passion he and Elizabeth shared, a life away from the only woman who had the power to turn his world inside out and upside down. It did not escape him that he had been walking in circles for over a quarter of an hour. He was waiting to meet Elizabeth for a much-needed talk. In Darcy's mind, Elizabeth's future was by his side, the mistress of his homes and the mother of his children, but if she did not know it by now, after all they had shared, she would never know it. Then it dawned on him. Perchance Elizabeth can be prevailed on to come with me to Derbyshire. In the spirit of nothing ventured is nothing gained. He owed it to them both to ask, did he not? He would not begrudge her decision should she refuse him. His solemn promise from the start had always been to respect her wishes. Soon enough they stood face to face discussing the matter, with Darcy assuring her that time away from Hertfordshire would be of mutual benefit. He went so far as to say once Elizabeth was away from Hertfordshire, she might appreciate all the beauty in life awaiting her beyond Longbourn. At length, Elizabeth said,
"How shall you refer to me, Mr. Darcy? As your mistress?"
No. If you agree to come with me, I shall invite Bingley and your sister to come too. No one would have reason to question such an arrangement."
"No, Mr. Darcy."
"Why are you rejecting my invitation, and with so little consideration, I might add?"
"You know the answer."
"Pray you're not using your engagement to that foolish man as your excuse. It is not as though he will not be here when you return." Darcy's tone reeked with disappointment.
"Pray, do not be angry with me. I would be lying if I said your invitation did not tempt me. I do not like the thought of being parted from you. But in light of our situation, what choice do we have? I am simply being realistic."
"Considering all that has unfolded between us, I rather suppose you are merely being stubborn."
Willing her spirits to playfulness, Elizabeth said, "I posit it is my stubbornness that attracts you most."
"That among so many other things that I adore about you," Darcy said, endeavouring to lighten his own mood. He had promised himself he would not begrudge her decision. What would have been the point?
"When shall you take your leave of Hertfordshire?"
"It will be best if I leave tomorrow."
"So soon?"
Darcy peered at Elizabeth. He said nothing. He would have to walk away from her. Leaving her very well meant he might never see her again. But what was he to do? A man would be a fool to ignore the way he felt every time he laid his eyes on her. She had slowly made her way into his heart. Elizabeth had even captured a piece of it that was so immense, the pain he suffered knowing she was committed to another man was palpable. So strong he would do anything for her, including, nay, especially, respecting her wishes. She was the woman of his dreams, but she was not his. Respecting Elizabeth's wishes proved the most frustrating trial of all. Would she truly settle for the loveless marriage that awaited her, and the certainty of never having children? leaving her with only the dreams and the memories of their time together to keep her company. The pain of that thought almost made him shudder. If such were the case, what choice did he have other than completely walking away from Elizabeth and protecting himself from a heart broken into 1,000 pieces? The thought of never seeing her again, of never touching her again, and of never hearing the sound of her heartbeat, or the playfulness in her laughter, struck him like pounding fists against his chest. Elizabeth was not his. Darcy had never felt so miserable. The middle of the night found Darcy and Elizabeth in each other's arms, holding on just a little bit tighter. Few words were exchanged between them. What was there to say that had not already been said? Both of them lay on top of the bed covers, fully clothed. Clinging to each other was conversation enough. Darcy awoke earlier than usual the next morning. Sitting beside Elizabeth, who slept soundly, he leaned closer, placed a soft kiss atop Elizabeth's head, and spoke the words he long wanted to say. "You, dearest Elizabeth, are the love of my life." And then he was gone. Had he looked back at her, had he looked closer, he would have noticed teardrops falling down Elizabeth's face.
Chapter 11. Mr. Darcy was always meant to go away. He was only meant to be in Hertfordshire a month. Elizabeth told herself that 1,000 times a day. But what a poor consolation for her body's yearning for Mr. Darcy's gentle touch and her heart's aching to see him again. She thought of him every morning as she dressed and when she tucked herself into bed at night. She could not escape the thought of him, no matter where she went or what she did. It was the night of the Netherfield ball. Clinging to the hope that Mr. Darcy would indeed return, Elizabeth prepared for the ball with more than usual care, despite his having made no promises that he would. Staring at her reflection as though oblivious of place and time, Elizabeth recalled the discussion she and Mr. Darcy had had on the subject of the ball a while ago, before he left.
"I'm told your younger sister prevailed on Charles and Mrs. Bingley to give a ball."
"How do you feel about that, Mr. Darcy?"
"How do I feel?"
"You must think it impertinent."
"I think it has nothing to do with me."
"Are you planning to attend the ball?"
"That depends. Will you dance the first set with me and then the next and then the next?" Darcy asked, flooding her senses with sweet kisses.
"No," Elizabeth began. "Despite the inherent mortification, I think we know who retains that privilege."
"I doubt I will be available to attend the ball," Darcy had said, pulling away. "I'm certain I would not be in the mood to see you on the arm of another man."
Feeling a tinge of regret over the way their conversation had ended that day, Elizabeth resolved the next time she was presented with such an opportunity, she would be more mindful of Mr. Darcy's wishes. She knew the annoyance he had suffered whenever she brought up the subject of her engagement, but he had assured her he did not fault her, not knowing how much he cherished Pemberley, his own home, and his own father's legacy. "Even if it means refusing to stand opposite Mr. Collins for the opening sets, I shall do so, if Mr. Darcy will but return." A knock at her bedroom door drew her from her musings. "Come in." A young maid entered.
"Pardon me, madam," she said as she bobbed a curtsy. "Mr. Collins told me to come here and ask if you are ready to leave for Netherfield. He says you are to arrive at the ball with him."
Elizabeth winced inside. Mr. Collins had grown quite officious of late. Being pompous and puffed up with pride was one thing. That she could easily ignore, even scoff at his ridiculousness. But being overbearing and domineering was altogether different. Elizabeth did not like this new version of him one bit. "Pray, inform Mr. Collins I will be down shortly. I must finish dressing first."
"Very well, madam," said the servant, curtsying and quitting the room.
Elizabeth took one last look at the beautiful gown that she had ordered as part of her trousseau when she married Mr. Tillman. The gown was simple and elegant, a lovely shade of ivory, adorned with white lace and embroidery. The bodice was laced and with tiny pearl buttons, a white satin ribbon threaded through. The sleeves and cuffs were the matching colour and perfectly trimmed at the ends with the same tiny pearls. She had not so much as looked at it in the wake of her late husband's death. More than a year had since passed. Elizabeth had not decided to wear the gown until the last minute. It was too pretty to stay tucked away in her trunk, and she really wanted to look wonderful for Mr. Darcy, even if she was relegated to the sidelines for having refused to stand opposite Mr. Collins on the dance floor. Such a penance surely would not prohibit her should she and Mr. Darcy escape the ballroom, in which case she would dance with him to her heart's content in some secluded place. After a while, Elizabeth had just finished arranging her hair when another knock came at her door. "Come in."
"Pardon me, madam," the servant said as she entered. "Mr. Collins has asked me to speak to you again and remind you of the hour."
Elizabeth continued admiring her reflection in the mirror. The thought of Mr. Darcy seeing her wearing such a beautiful gown in the midst of a crowded ballroom filled Elizabeth with such eager anticipation that she sent the servant away with the instruction that she would be ready to leave for Netherfield in 5 minutes. The closer the carriage drew to the manor house entrance, the more nervous Elizabeth grew. Mr. Darcy had to be there. He had to have returned by now. Elizabeth's body quivered, her heart began to pound, she felt flushed and she thought she was going to faint. She had never felt this way before. She ached for Mr. Darcy. She wanted to see him, to feel him, and lose herself in his arms again. Mr. Darcy must certainly come. "Mr. Collins," Elizabeth said when she arrived at the ball, resolved to get rid of him as soon as possible, "I'm afraid I must tell you something. You see, sir, I am not feeling well. I understand that you may be disappointed, but I find I cannot dance this evening. In fact, I may have to excuse myself from the festivities altogether to allow for my recovery."
Oh, but I had fully intended for us to enjoy the 2 first dances especially, a preference that is no less my duty than it is my pleasure. Thereafter, I have planned to remain close by your side all evening, that is to say, when I am not engaged on the dance floor by one of my other cousins who will no doubt be expecting the attention.
Elizabeth shook her head. "I am sorry to disrupt your plans, Mr. Collins, but I am not of a mind to dance tonight. My present constitution will not permit such exertion."
Very well, Elizabeth, he said, resting his hand atop hers.
"Thank heavens I am wearing gloves," she painstakingly considered, pulling her hand away all the same. Mr. Collins cleared his throat.
"Your excellent health is my primary concern. Saying that, I hope you will not be distressed should I partake in my own share of merriment. I rather fancy myself to be an excellent dancer."
The silly man went on to espouse Lady Catherine de Bourgh herself, once remarked on his being light-footed. Elizabeth tried not to smirk. "I would not dare suspend your pleasure, sir. Indeed, I insist you spend the entire evening dancing with every young woman in want of a partner." By the end of the evening, Elizabeth truly was feeling indisposed, suffering agony of the acutest kind. Mr. Darcy did not attend the ball. Elizabeth's disappointment was complete when she heard Caroline Bingley opining to her sister, Mrs. Hurst, that the gentleman reportedly had been seen about town in frequent company with a Lady Alexandria Middleton. Her voice pained, Caroline Bingley described the young woman as being a renowned beauty, tall and elegant, an accomplished young lady indeed, and in possession of a fortune of £50,000, which in Caroline's mind must surely account for Mr. Darcy's preference for the other woman over herself. She concluded her speech by saying the entire Fitzwilliam family highly desired an alliance, especially the Right Honourable Lady Catherine de Bourgh. What a stroke of luck indeed to be so highly favoured. Elizabeth could hardly wait to flee to the outside balcony and catch her breath. She placed her hand on her chest, willing herself to breathe. Upon inhaling, she felt a painful, aching sensation in her heart that took every fibre of her being not to pity herself. Surely, a true gentleman like Mr. Darcy deserved to be happy. The thought of his being lonely was a lot for Elizabeth to bear, even if the idea of his being with another threatened to break her heart in two. She had no one to blame but herself for the distress she was feeling. "I have been the catalyst," the chief instigator of my own torment with my stubbornness and my headstrong ways. Elizabeth hugged herself to keep warm. She chewed her bottom lip as she pondered her situation, and her voice quavered when she softly spoke. Till this moment, I never knew myself. Chapter 12. Elizabeth awoke that morning with the same thoughts that had accompanied her to sleep, those stirring sentiments which made her toss and turn all night. She had known the pain of loss, of mourning a dearly departed loved one, but this pain in her heart was entirely unknown, for it was the pain of a broken heart. If things were not bad enough, hours later found her alone in the parlour with Mr. Collins prancing about while she sat in her chair, hands crossed in her lap, wishing she was anywhere else in the world.
"Elizabeth, my dear," he said, "I am inclined to agree with your mother on this matter. Now that we have Lady Catherine de Bourgh's blessing to marry, there is no reason at all for us not to proceed post-haste."
Lady Catherine?
"My former and most benevolent benefactor."
I know who she is to you, Elizabeth interrupted. I had no idea her opinion was a contributing factor in the timing of our plans. His expression aghast, Collins said,
"I hope your saying that is not a reflection of your lack of esteem for the most charitable person one might ever hope to meet, but rather an indication of your desire to hurry things along."
Elizabeth was nowhere nearly so calm and collected as she presented herself. Her busy mind raced and yet could not keep pace with her rapid heartbeat. "Mr. Collins," she said, "pray pardon me. I believe I could use a breath of fresh air before we continue this line of discussion." By now, her head was swimming.
"There is no need to make yourself uneasy," she heard Collins say. "Have you and I not planned for our union all along? Have not your entire family? Your family shall always have this home. Your mother, your younger sisters, as well as yourself. To say nothing of your dreams of securing Longbourn as a legacy to your late father's memory. It is what you have always wanted."
Elizabeth sat there in stunned silence.
"Very well," Mr. Collins began. "I shall consider your silence as encouragement enough to set the wheels in motion, starting with the reading of the banns."
Elizabeth bolted from her chair. "No!" Mr. Collins smiled.
"No doubt you are overwhelmed by what is about to unfold. Indeed, I find your modesty quite touching, indeed admirable, and everything that is pleasing to a member of the opposite sex, although it is not as though you have never been through all this before, what with your marriage to the late Mr. Tillman."
"Indeed, I have been through this before, which is why I cannot go through it again. I cannot marry you, Mr. Collins."
"Why on earth have you changed your mind after all this time? Surely it can have nothing to do with me. My situation in life, as the master of Longbourn, is a circumstance highly in my favour. I must therefore conclude that the fault lies entirely with you. I must caution you to take it into further consideration that in spite of your manifold attractions, it is by no means certain that another offer of marriage may ever be made to you. Your portion is unhappily so small that it will, in all likelihood, undo the effects of your loveliness and amiable qualifications. In all likelihood, if another offer of marriage does not materialize, you may live out your life as a sad and lonely spinster. I hope this is not the case, but I wish to reveal the grim truth to you early on so that you can prepare yourself. That is to say nothing of the situation of your family, your mother and your 3 younger sisters, who are nothing without the comforts of Longbourn to shield them. I know you too well to suspect that you would ever choose a course that would cause them discomfort, nor will you shoulder your brother-in-law Bingley with the burden of providing for the lot of them. The humiliation of abject poverty is something you will never inflict on your family," Mr. Collins continued. "I must therefore conclude that you are not serious in your rejection of me. Instead, I shall choose to attribute it to your wish of increasing my love by suspense, according to the usual practice of elegant females."
Elizabeth could feel her colour rising. "I assure you, sir, that I have no pretensions to flattering you. The last thing in the world I mean to do is torment you. I thank you again and again for the honour you have bestowed upon me in your marriage proposal. but it would be impossible for me to go along with it any more by pretending it is something I truly desire. My feelings have changed and are at present in dire conflict with your expectation. Can I speak more plainly? You ought not to consider me an elegant woman trying to vex you. Instead, consider me a rational creature speaking from the bottom of my heart.
"You are uniformly charming," cried he, with an air of awkward gallantry. "I have listened to all you have to say, just as a gentleman ought to do, and now I shall consider the matter settled and plan accordingly. As I said, we shall be wedded once the banns are read." Then, lowering his voice, he leaned closer. "Fear not, for henceforward I shall make no mention of any small indiscretion that may or may not have transpired on your part during the course of our engagement. We must all have our secrets."
Was Mr. Collins threatening her? Did he know more than he was saying, or was he merely posturing, attempting to deflect from his own shortcomings? What did it even matter at this point? His perseverance in deliberate self-deception and his persistence in considering her rejection as flattering encouragement was beyond the pale. Elizabeth would not be deterred. Elizabeth may have lost her chance with Mr. Darcy, but her time with him, as precious as it had been, and despite how it came about, had helped her find something else she had lost: her own sense of self, her desire for something meaningful in her life, passion, abiding love, children. "I want it all," she silently declared. "I want it all."
"Pardon me?"
"I said I want it all. I cannot marry you, Mr. Collins. I want it all."
"What are you saying?"
At last, the haze of wanting what she thought was best for others at the expense of her own needs had lifted along with her fear of leaving part of herself behind should she let go of her past. "I am saying no, to you, to Mamma, my younger sisters, to my father's legacy, to Longbourn. Finally, I am thinking only of myself and what I want. So, no, Mr. Collins, I cannot marry you, and yes, I will have the kind of life I so richly deserve. I will have it all." Chapter 13. Elizabeth's declaration of freedom was not without costs. All of her family would be affected by what she had done, not the least of whom was her dearest sister Jane. Mr. Collins's words hung over Elizabeth like a load of bricks as she made her way to Netherfield once she escaped Longbourn House and all of her mother's recriminations.
"I know you too well to suspect that you would ever choose a course that would cause them discomfort. Nor will you shoulder your brother-in-law Bingley with the burden of providing for the lot of them."
There was a time when Elizabeth was willing to settle for a life of comfort and security for her loved ones, a life where she had to please everyone but herself. That part of her had changed. She was no longer willing to settle for less than everything. Collins's words may have served an apt description of Elizabeth's sentiments some months ago, but certainly not any more, as her refusal to marry the pompous man attested. Not any more. Elizabeth had never considered herself a gambler. A young widow of 21 with no fortune and scant connections at best, her life held no guarantees. Still, she had willingly handed her life over to fate. Come what may, she meant to be content in the knowledge that she was doing what she thought was best for herself. She prayed her sister would understand. Some time later, sitting across from her elder sister in the privacy of Jane's particular parlour, Elizabeth said, "Jane, I fear when you learn what I have done, you will hate me."
"Hate you, dearest Lizzie. You know that is impossible." Jane squeezed her sister's hand. "Pray, tell me, what have you done?"
"I told Mr. Collins that I cannot marry him."
"Bravo, Lizzie!" Jane exclaimed with energy.
This was not the response Elizabeth had expected from her sister. "How can you be so happy knowing the hardship my decision must surely wreak on Mr. Bingley and you, especially as you prepare to welcome the start of your own family?"
"What hardship are you speaking of?"
"Surely you must know. Mamma and the younger girls will have to come and live with you."
And what of yourself, Lizzie?
I suppose I might prevail on our uncle and aunt in town, Mr. and Mrs. Gardner, for a place to live until I can gain employment as a governess or perhaps a paid companion.
Lizzie, no.
What else is there for me to do? I am willing to do anything other than marry Mr. Collins. Trust me, I have thought long and hard on the subject. The idea of spending the rest of my life with such a man is more than I can bear.
But what of your heartfelt desire to retain your place as mistress of Longbourn? Not that I do not applaud your decision to refuse Mr. Collins or mean to change your mind, but what of your resolve to do so for the sake of our father's legacy?
I came to realise that nothing warranted the sacrifice of my own chances for happiness.
Does your change of heart have anything to do with Mr. Darcy?
Mr. Darcy?
Pray do not pretend to misunderstand me.
You know about Mr. Darcy and me?
How could I not know? I have seen the way the two of you looked at each other. I also know your feelings for each other extend far beyond the bounds of casual acquaintances.
Elizabeth felt her colour rising. Did everyone know about her affair with Mr. Darcy? She persuaded herself such was not the case, for doing otherwise was not something she wanted to think of. Besides, it was Jane speaking. Jane, who knew Elizabeth better than anyone else in the world knew her. Of course, Jane would know, or at least suspect. Oh, how Jane must be feeling! Why did you not say anything?
I was waiting for you to tell me.
Oh, Jane, I must apologise for concealing so much from you. Part of me wanted nothing more than to confide in you, but I did not want you to think less of me.
Oh, Lizzie, Jane began. As for what occurs between consenting adults, who am I to judge? Both you and Mr. Darcy are healthy and full of life, and much too young to suffer the loneliness a widow of 21 and a widower of 28 must surely endure. Jane hugged her sister. I could not have been happier for you. Knowing you have found the love you so richly deserve means everything to me. It is what I have always hoped for you.
Love? You suppose me to be in love? Elizabeth asked, upon relinquishing her sister's embrace.
Are you not? Jane asked with surprise.
Whether I am in love makes no difference now that Mr. Darcy has left Hertfordshire with no promise of a return. If I am to be entirely honest, any hope I secretly entertained that I might see him again was lost when he failed to attend your ball. Jane's lips tightened in understanding.
I know you would have liked for him to have come, and how much it pained you when he did not. I suspect you believe his absence at the ball meant he no longer cares for you, as he did before.
Elizabeth nodded. It was then that I realised I had lost him forever.
Now you cannot know that for sure.
Dearest Jane, if only I were as good as you, I would have no cause to repine. I fear, however, my pessimism is justified. It is my reward for comporting myself the way I did when Mr. Darcy was here as your guest. My losing Mr. Darcy forever is no less than I deserve.
Lizzie?
I wish it were not so, Elizabeth said, but I must live with this feeling and accept it.
You do not mean that, Lizzie, Jane said.
In truth, Elizabeth did not know how to feel regarding whether she deserved to lose Mr. Darcy's affection. All she knew was she missed him more and more with each passing day. And whenever Caroline Bingley's words crept into her mind regarding his presumed courtship with Lady Alexandria Middleton, or whatever was the young heiress and purported beauty's name, Elizabeth took what little comfort could be taken in the idea that between Mr. Darcy and herself, at least one of them was happy. Days later, Elizabeth met with a delightful surprise when she was out walking on the lane. Her friend Charlotte was just up ahead, waiting for her. What a balm for Elizabeth to see a friendly face, for Charlotte was one of the few people besides Jane who did not fault her for her decision not to marry Mr. Collins. Elizabeth, however, detected a change in her friend when the two stood face to face. Charlotte wasted no time bringing Elizabeth abreast of her recent development.
You are the one person in the world whose friendship I value most, Charlotte began, which is why I fear you will wonder and blame me for a decision I have made, and as much as your disapprobation will injure me, my resolve is unshakable.
Charlotte, what in heavens are you talking about? You are too sensible to warrant any disapprobation on my part. You are the most sensible person I know.
I fear you will not feel that way when you hear what I have to say.
Elizabeth laughed at her friend's consternation. I doubt that very much. That is, unless you mean to tell me you are engaged to marry Mr. Collins. Elizabeth could not help but laugh aloud at hearing the words fall from her mouth. Charlotte, however, was not laughing. Charlotte, Elizabeth cried.
It is true. I am engaged to marry Mr. Collins, and, before you say anything else, I have to tell you what a happy occasion this is for my entire family. For so long, I have been nothing but a burden to my family. Surely you must comprehend what this means to my mother and father. As for my siblings, the younger girls are now entertaining hopes of coming out a year or two sooner than they might otherwise have done, and my situation has relieved my brothers from their apprehension of my dying an old maid. So do anything but pity me, Eliza, for I am quite contented with my decision.
Elizabeth knew not how to think or feel upon hearing this. Had she, too, not entertained the idea of marrying the ridiculous man to satisfy her own purposes?
My news also contributes to the benefit of your family, Charlotte said.
How so? Elizabeth asked.
Mr. Collins has agreed to abide by my wish to allow your family to remain at Longbourn until such time as you all are properly settled in another establishment of your own choosing. None of you ought to feel prevailed on to leave Longbourn before you are ready to leave.
Charlotte's intelligence could not have come at a better time, for Mr. Collins, upon finally coming to terms with Elizabeth's refusal to go through with the wedding, had advised Elizabeth that her family ought to vacate Longbourn in under a fortnight. I must confess your scheme is an exceedingly agreeable consolation, although I doubt my mother will be pleased knowing her standing as Mistress Emeritus of Longbourn is irrevocably revoked. Still, allow me to thank you on everyone's behalf.
You ought to know I think of your family as merely an extension of my own. I have always felt closer to you and Jane than I have to my own sisters.
Indeed, we have always been the most intimate of friends, which is why I want to make sure you know what you are about. What I am trying to say is you ought to know exactly what you are getting yourself into.
Eliza, pray say no more, Charlotte interrupted. I am 27, and before now entirely without prospects. The chance to be mistress of my own home is well worth any other sacrifice I might endure. Trust me when I say I know exactly what I am about.
Satisfied that she had at least tried to warn her friend about Mr. Collins's condition, Elizabeth said no more on the subject. Instead, she returned to Longbourn with her friend. When Mrs. Bennet heard the news, there was no telling what she might say or to whom she might say it. Elizabeth felt she ought to be the one to shoulder the brunt of her mother's disapprobation, not Charlotte. In the wake of her refusal to marry Mr. Collins, her mother's censure had become Elizabeth's constant companion whenever the two women were near each other. She had grown quite accustomed to it.
Chapter 14. Darcy thought his leaving Hertfordshire was the best thing for all parties concerned. His relation, Lady Catherine de Bourgh, was pleased enough by his return to society. Finding a suitable candidate as the next mistress of his home had become her chief employment. The parade of young ladies his relation had thrown in his path crossed his mind, the most recent being Lady Alexandria Middleton. What an exercise in futility, Darcy considered, rubbing his fingers over his brow. Unbeknown to her ladyship, his heart had already been captured, even though he had chosen to leave it behind. Time and distance had made no difference, however, making him wonder what was the point in leaving Elizabeth's side if all he ever did was dream of her. Asleep in his bed at his London townhouse, that lonely night was no exception. Another sudden assault from her kiss foiled Darcy's attempt to pull away from Elizabeth, but this time he allowed himself to enjoy it as he held onto her waist, relishing the feel of her soft body against his own. Her hands went up his arms, slowly caressing his muscles. "We should not be going on in this way," his heart whispered. "She is not mine. She will never be mine. I must let her go." The more he resisted, the more determined Elizabeth became, and soon he could feel the warmth of her breath as she leaned in further, closing the space between them. She seemed to forget that they were supposed to be saying their goodbyes and instead pulled him to her as they continued to kiss each other. For a moment he could not respond, for the kiss had taken over his senses, his emotions, his very soul. Continuing his ardent attentions, he resumed obliging her in all the best ways. She went wild with her excitement, encouraging him to carry on. At length, Elizabeth threw her head back and began screaming Darcy's name. Darcy slowly made his way to Elizabeth's side and pulled her into his arms.
"I suppose I should be thanking you or something after what you just did."
Putting a smile on his face, he said, "I will take that as a compliment." He kissed her lips, then ran his fingers down her cheek to her neck.
"No less than you deserve."
"If only I could have you by my side every night."
"Every night," she replied, raising her eyebrows expectantly.
"Merely dreaming of you when you're not here as a paltry substitute. My dreams cannot make me nearly so happy as this." Darcy then rested his head on her neck and whispered into her ear, "I love you, Elizabeth." Darcy gave Elizabeth a lingering kiss on her chin, then her lips, and finally her forehead. "This has been the best night of my life," Elizabeth smiled.
"Thank you."
"Thank you," he echoed, and they both went to sleep. Thus the culmination of another night spent dreaming of Elizabeth, so passionate, so incredible, and yet so far from being the real thing.
Chapter 15. Elizabeth now resided at Netherfield for all intents and purposes, for she was there all the time. Longbourn was no longer her home, but then again, neither was Netherfield. Making matters worse, the latter held memories of Mr. Darcy everywhere she looked, a circumstance which undoubtedly added to her sufferings, memories that would not leave her alone, and her heart ached from longing for him. Her solitary walks in the crisp, dewy park early in the morning were the source of her greatest solace, bolstering her for another day of feigning contentment with the path she had chosen for herself and the uncertainty of where it might lead. Now, more than ever, she relished these moments alone to gather her thoughts before a new day brought its challenges. Upon returning to the manor house, Elizabeth stopped dead in her tracks. A carriage similar to the one owned by Mr. Darcy was parked near the front steps. Then the gentleman himself stepped out of the carriage and accepted his hat and cane from the footman. He darted his eyes from side to side as if looking for someone, and then he rested them on Elizabeth. "Mr. Darcy!" The Bingleys had said nothing of the gentleman's imminent return. Had they conspired to keep the intelligence to themselves? Or would they be as surprised about his arrival as Elizabeth? Soon enough, he was standing directly before Elizabeth. After they exchanged the usual civilities, a gentlemanly bow by him, a ladylike curtsy by her, Elizabeth tried to hide her surprise by giving him a polite smile, which he returned with one of his own, and asked, "Did you come here from Derbyshire? Did you have a pleasant trip?"
"I did not go to Derbyshire."
My heart aches when I hear this. It is as I expected. Mr. Darcy has been in London all along, heeding Lady Catherine de Bourgh's dictate that he should find a bride among the ton. Her smile faltering, Elizabeth fought to keep it in place. "Why ever not?" Elizabeth asked, fearing she already knew the answer.
"I ought to have gone to Derbyshire. I ought to be there now, but I could not bear the thought of returning to my home without you, so I went to London instead."
Elizabeth was quiet for a moment. "And now you are here."
"To see you, Elizabeth," Darcy replied. He slowly stepped closer. I had to see you.
I thought you would never return, Elizabeth said, her eyes poring all over him. She looked at his face, those perfect lips, those brooding eyes, those dark brows, his chiselled cheek. It was very apparent he had changed since she last saw him. His body was slimmer and his face gaunt. Elizabeth couldn't stop looking at him. I've missed you so much.
I have missed you too. He threw a glance about the courtyard. Will you walk with me?
Elizabeth fell into place beside him with a nod, heading away from the house.
While in London, Mr. Darcy said after a few moments of silence, I received a letter from Lady Catherine in which she wrote of her former vicar's aborted engagement and his securing a promise from a different young woman on the heels of his rejection. Mr. Darcy paused his steps, encouraging Elizabeth to do likewise, and he looked directly at her. I must confess that learning this has taught me to hope, he said, as I had scarcely ever allowed myself to hope before, hence my reason for being here. If I had known you would renounce your plans for Longbourn, I would have never left. He took a deep breath, then continued. I have only ever wanted to support your dreams and your duty to Longbourn, not interfere with them for my own selfish reasons. But now that your plans have changed, I will have to tell you that I never wish to be parted from you again.
Elizabeth could hardly believe what was happening. He is here. Mr. Darcy is standing here in front of me. Can this be the second chance I secretly have been praying for? She could not help but reflect on the irony of Mr. Darcy's intelligence regarding Lady Catherine de Bourgh's missive. No doubt her mentioning Mr. Collins's circumstances was incidental, with no genuine concern about someone so insignificant in consequence to herself. How ironic indeed that such an inconsequential observation on her ladyship's part had prompted Mr. Darcy to come back to Hertfordshire, back to me. Elizabeth felt Mr. Darcy's eyes searching hers. She loved him, there was no doubt in her mind. She was afraid she had pushed him away, but he was standing directly before her. Her silence, no doubt, was encouraging enough for him to continue.
You must allow me to tell you how much I admire and love you. I love you, most ardently. When I open my eyes each morning, yours is the first face I want to see. I want to spend the rest of my life with you. He took her hand in both of his, pressing it against his chest. Please, do me the honour of accepting my hand.
Elizabeth's heart raced as Mr. Darcy continued to speak.
Elizabeth, Mr. Darcy said, if you love me as much as I love you, you will not refuse me.
I do love you, Mr. Darcy, she replied. I love you with all my heart and soul. Mr. Darcy took Elizabeth's other hand in his.
So let me have you, he said. All of you. Be my wife.
As Elizabeth gazed into his eyes, she nodded. Yes, she whispered. I want nothing more than to be your wife. He pulled her close, kissing her cheeks, her long, slender neck and her lips. He held her tightly, letting his love for her flow through him as he tried to express all of it in his kisses. After a few moments, Elizabeth eased away and caught her breath. She realised that Mr. Darcy never gave up on her, and the thought made her love him more than ever. Thank you, she said earnestly. Thank you for returning. Thank you for not giving up on me. Mr. Darcy smiled warmly at her.
I know that I could have never given up on you, even if I had wanted to. From the moment I first laid eyes on you, you were all I ever wanted, all I ever needed.
Elizabeth shook her head, marvelling at him. What did I ever do to deserve you? He touched her cheek.
I might ask you the same. All I know is you, my dearest, loveliest Elizabeth, managed to break into a heart that had long ago shut itself off from feeling anything, to the point where I cannot imagine my life without you.
Elizabeth started to say something, but Mr. Darcy leaned forward and sealed his mouth to hers. Her arms came up around him, and they kissed long and deep. Satisfied that Mr. Darcy's words would echo in her heart forever, at length, she broke their kiss and gazed into her lover's eyes. Well then, Mr. Darcy, let us never be apart from each other again, she said. They stood there for a long time, revelling in their love. Neither of them wanted to move, not even take a step back from the other. Eventually, though, they parted reluctantly. The morning sun was rising over Netherfield Park, and soon the household would abound with liveliness. And excited as Elizabeth was to share her joyful news with Jane, she was in no hurry to relinquish her current bliss. Mr. Darcy must have felt the same way. Taking Elizabeth's hand in his, they walked on, without knowing in what direction, the house fading from view. There was too much to be thought, and felt, and said for attention to anything or anyone but themselves. They talked about everything, the past, the present, and their hopes for the future. One thought, in particular, was always on Elizabeth's mind, the moment she first laid eyes on Mr. Darcy. The late-night accidental room assignment that brought them together was just the beginning of their love story. How could I not have known from the start that Mr. Darcy is the embodiment of all my hopes and dreams come true, my everything? Elizabeth looked up at Mr. Darcy, her eyes shining with a torrent of touching emotions swelling deep inside her. From this moment on, we shall be together, united as one, through all eternity.
You've been enjoying After Last Night with Mr. Darcy, written by P.O. Dixon and read by a multicast of professional human voice replicas. Thank you for listening. We truly hope you enjoyed it, and will share your thoughts in the comments. Your continuing support makes all the difference in helping us bring more stories like this to YouTube. In addition to commenting, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. To our growing community of channel members, thank you for being here. Not yet a member? Join today for special perks, including minimal ads during the early listening period and much more.